Well, welcome to our presentation this morning. My name is Imran Bashir. I'm CTO of Cloud Computing for InfoReliance. And our presentation this morning can be summed up with a single phrase. You build it, you own it. There you have it there. You have heard our entire presentation. Okay. But if I see that you are this crowd is hungry for knowledge here. So to give you some more details about DevOps, here with me is John Sankovich, who is Vice President of Cloud Computing at InfoReliance. Tony Nguyen, who is a Senior Solution Architect at AWS. Ross Serino, who is a Principal Consultant at InfoReliance as well. And we're honored to have Mr. Jack Stout, who is a Director for Solution Delivery at HHS Office of the CIO. So we will be talking about three main things today. Number one, what is this DevOps thing that we keep hearing about? The phrase has been around for some time, and there has been some misconception about it as well. So we'll talk about what it is, what is its importance, and how does AWS enable you to use DevOps in your organization. We'll talk about some of the customer success stories that we have leveraged those services and principles and approach, and Mr. Jack Stout will be talking about some of that as well. And then finally, it requires a cultural change in the organization to really bring DevOps together. And we will be talking about that. John will be talking about that. At InfoReliance, we have been doing cloud computing for a number of years, and we have seen how industry, cloud service providers, and the whole partner ecosystem has brought this thing together and matured enough that now you can start using cloud computing and leverage its real benefits. How we do that is that, number one, we are an advanced consulting partner for AWS. We are one of the handful of managed service providers, audited managed service providers. And then finally, from a government standpoint, we're also a government reseller. So the key to our success has been with DevOps. And the question is, what is DevOps? So if you ever wonder, companies like Netflix and Amazon and Facebook, how do they deliver value to their customers on almost like a daily basis? And sometimes even multiple times a day. Whereas some of the other companies, when they want to deliver an update to their software, it takes them months to do that. So the key to the success of these companies is that they have learned how to bring their development and operations people together and deliver value to their customer using a continuous delivery, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. All of this, when brought together, when you take your development and take your operations people and share responsibilities between them, they all share a common goal. And that's what the key to the success of that. So a lot of times you may have heard the term DevOps or NoOps. How many people have heard the term NoOps when they're talking about DevOps? Exactly. So just a little history lesson there. The term was originally coined by a Forrester researcher somewhere around 2008. It was picked up by one of the architects at Netflix, Crockcroft, and he wrote it in a blog. But really what they were talking about is that the whole infrastructure, the whole environment is so automated and abstracted that you don't even need any operations team. Which is not quite true, though. I mean, DevOps is really where development teams and operations teams assume responsibilities and share and collaborate to deliver and continuously integrate and deploy the value to their customers. And all this agility is really, for government cases, it's our US citizens who are our customers. So eventually the end customers are US citizens, where we can deliver more value to them through your websites, applications, and all that. Okay, so what does DevOps do? Okay, traditionally you can really see that there are multiple siloed organizations, business, development, operations, I mean at a very high level. What agile methods, or some people incorrectly call it methodologies, but what agile methods do is they bring business and development together. So they work together, they say, what do we need in our software to run our operations, to run our business, right? At the same token, using the same principles, if you bring development and operations together, where when you are coding, you look at the infrastructure, at code the infrastructure as well. You look at the data center as an API. Same thing for operations. They are worried about the stability of their entire environment, but development is providing more and more value to that. They want to continuously deploy new features to that, which threatens their stability. When they work together, this business agility and DevOps, using those continuous delivery, continuous operations, continuous integration, continuous deployment, brings value and meets your customer needs. Now, all of that is really good in abstract terms. But when you are talking about AWS, AWS has really provided you services and features which can enable all of your DevOps easily. And to talk about that, I would like to invite Tony Nguyen, who is a senior architect at AWS. Tony?
Thanks, Imran. So one question I'd like to ask everyone here is basically, how long would it take your organization to deploy a change that maybe had, say, a line of code that was it, just changed? Days? A week? A month? Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I often hear in the government, public sector, that kind of thing. And there are sort of two approaches towards this kind of change when you think of it. Oftentimes, the days, weeks, months approach. It trends towards let's make it a big deal. Let's put a whole big process behind it. Let's make sure that we have it in compartmentalized stages. Make a big deal out of it. Or you cannot make a big deal out of it, and you can make it into small, incremental, non-issue changes. So yesterday, if you were listening to the keynote, the CIO of DHS's Citizenship and Immigration Services talked about how he was able to leverage DevOps principles to basically move away from these, let's make everything a big deal, to let's make it small, quick, iterative, small cycles. And really at the core of this is agility. And you may have heard that AWS is a very agile platform, being able to spin things up on demand, minutes. But furthermore, behind every AWS service is the ability to programmatically access the service itself. And if you can program something, you can automate it. And this, in DevOps, there's this concept of continuous integration, continuous deployment that Imran was referring to. And you can do this through AWS services because it's all programmatic. You can automate it. And to me, that combined with AWS's already agile nature makes DevOps and AWS really a no-brainer. So with DevOps, IT and developer roles are merged, and they follow kind of a series of systematic principles. There's infrastructure as code, there's continuous deployment, there's automation, there's monitoring, and there's security. Now, AWS provides services that hit all of these points. And we enable the creation, deployment, and maintenance of infrastructure in a way that's really, again, programmatic, agile, descriptive, and really, it makes everything just smooth. Now, let's go over each of these services. As you can see, we have a vast suite of them. And let me just call out one of them. Oh, let's go back. So CloudFormation. Who here has heard of the Mars Curiosity rover? Great, great. So NASA's JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, tasked AWS with providing a way to stream the landing to millions of viewers across the world. Now, that's pretty cool. 1080p stream, 1 million users. Yeah, it's a relatively solved problem, right? Issues. So NASA said that you can't use our live stream. And also, you have 6 days to figure it out. And also, it's the same week as the Olympics, so figure that out too. So it was an issue. But with the services that we provide at Amazon, we were able to actually figure this out. So CloudFormation provides a templatized way of defining your infrastructure. Again, infrastructure as code. And in doing so, we were able to spin up elastically, flexibly, and at scale, instances that were able to play these media events to millions of viewers across the world. And this was great, and everyone was able to see the stream, and everyone was happy. So let's go over more of a workflow-based view. So you can begin by kind of defining your infrastructure as code, like I said before with our services. And then the next thing you can do is look at services such as code deploy, code pipeline, code commit. And then you can have a sort of continuous delivery process with either, you can continue with services such as Beanstalk and OpsWorks. And finally, at the end of it all, monitoring performance is also a big thing in DevOps. There's often this confusion at first glance about how QA and monitoring are two distinct topics. But under DevOps principles, they're actually the same thing. Because at the core of it, when you're monitoring, at a high level, you can't really look at every single aspect of your project. Going through QA, you want to look at every single thing of your project. So when you're having a monitoring suite looking at your system, you might, at say a very basic level, you might be only looking at some reporting service that says, hey, I'm okay, every 10 seconds. But if it's not fully fleshed out, fully developed under a sort of monitoring suite, you have no idea if your code is fully working. At the same token, if you aren't looking at everything in your QA suite all the time, then you also don't have that same sort of view. So the combination of monitoring and QA is actually one and the same. And having things such as CloudWatch allows you to look at your entire application in sort of DevOps manner. Now, going into a more detailed view of how you can sort of look at all these services in a workflow, we're going to bring up Ross.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much, Tony. I hope people are kind of hearing this common theme of agility, and we're also kind of throwing out a lot of Amazon terms you may or may not be familiar with. So we, over the years, have gotten really comfortable with things like CloudFormation. It's a service that's been around for a while, and CloudTrail has become very critical into this to audit everything, and CloudWatch with monitoring health of servers, as well as CloudWatch logs that monitor applications. This suite really starts to come together in this grand scheme of how we deploy. And just to give you some background on the way that I used to deploy code with a customer is that we were required to deploy to an air-gapped network, which required the burning of the source code in a compiled form to a CD and then driving 10 minutes to a location to then copy it onto a staging network and deploy it to be available for QA. Often we found that there was one line of code that was incorrect, and we had to repeat that process of burning CDs and driving. Needless to say, when I started getting involved with AWS, I was very excited about a new way of doing things. And what's key to all of this is the core processes are exactly identical. Whether you are burning code to a CD and driving it 15 minutes, or you're automatically deploying on check-in to GitHub, the key here is a process, which is why when we start talking about their deployment options, you'll notice that the first box is that there's an issue tracker. Every change that's made to a system needs to be tracked. When we say we're doing DevOps, we're not willy-nilly making changes live in production. We're following a well-governed process that leverages the tools that are available to us to continuously deliver a consistent platform. So once an issue has been raised and it's validated that a code is needed, that's where your integrated team starts getting involved. And I call it an integrated team because, as you saw earlier, QA, developers, and operations should all specialize in their respective areas, but overlap with every other area. Once you start getting things into the pipeline, you will naturally first make your change into some type of development environment. That development environment can be a laptop. It can be a workspace on Amazon Workspaces. It can also be an EC2 instance that you use, that you remote desktop into to make changes. And once you've made those changes, the idea is you want to check in that change so that others may see it. In the old way, there was this, I'm going to throw it over the fence. So when I've made a change to code, I'm going to throw it over the fence to QA or to a deployment manager who needs to do that deployment. Well, that introduces a series of lag time, and when a new change, as minor as it may be, related to the original issue trying to be solved is needed, you would have to wait for that next person to do their job. With the integrated team, what we start doing is, as soon as we check into code, it triggers a code review. And assuming everything is fine, it triggers an automated deployment with something like a custom continuous integration service like Travis or Jenkins, or with some type of managed AWS service like Code Deploy. And recently, I've had the pleasure of working with Amazon Code Deploy, and I have to say, it's really shifting the way our quality assurance team looks at software. When we make a change, they see it. And we had deployments auto-hooked from GitHub using the Code Deploy service being available in the test site within 1 minute of check-in. And you no longer think about deployment being a complex process. You just see issues, fix issues, and check them in. And then the other key here is that once we get into this pipeline of testing, staging, and production, all of these environments are intended to be exactly the same. So there is no, let's just hope it works in production when it runs on the fast hardware. I've heard that all too many times where an issue is found during testing saying, when I run this report, it takes too long. Oh, well, that's because you're using the testing database, which wasn't on the really fast disks. When it goes to production, I'm sure it'll be faster. How many people have heard that one? And it's always infrastructure's fault, by the way. So with Amazon, when we say own the application, there is no disk to blame. If you need a certain number of IOPS, you ask for that number of IOPS. You replicate that in your test and staging environment. And once you get this pattern of consistency, overlaid with a process of governance, making sure that all changes are appropriate and validated, you can start making changes to production every day, and it no longer becomes a big fear. I had a customer ask me, I want to become more agile with my deployments. What can I do? And I asked them, what's your target? Do you want to deploy to production every 15 minutes? And they got scared. And it's scary when you first think about it, but once you see that there's a process that all of this follows, there's checks and balances, and most importantly, a measure of excellence that overlays all of this process. If you can introduce quantitative metrics into everything that you do as a team, you can begin to instill confidence across an organization and really shift the way things happen. We love to hear about how Amazon.com benefited from a DevOps mentality. And they get to do things like deploy every 7 minutes. And they've seen just astronomical savings in consistency and quality as Amazon has developed a DevOps mentality. We see that our environments are consistent. We have automation, which reduces the number of hands-on, which is both great for security as well as making sure that everything happens exactly the same as you promote through different areas. In an ideal world, nobody has access to log into production. The scripts just run and do what they do in the exact same way that they worked in test. And then we get to leverage all of this power of elasticity through what's offered in Amazon Web Services so that not only is this consistent, but it is able to scale as more people hit a service. And finally, there's a really important aspect of team culture here. And most recently, I was working on a project, and a project manager was going over a timeline and saying, you know, when Ross, will you make the build available to QA? And I kind of laughed because I said, you know, I don't do builds anymore. They just happen. There is no QA waiting for the build. When the code's checked in, it's there. And it's a shift that I'm observing where people are starting to wrap their head around, it's just there. That doesn't mean that I'm changing code live in production. And that's the thing that I really enjoy stressing, because I think when people started hearing this DevOps mentality, they said, oh no, the developers are going to log into production and just make changes whenever they want. And it's not that. DevOps is much more about an integrated product team that promotes a culture of excellence that works together to solve problems as quickly as possible. And to go over some more customer success stories, I'm going to hand it back to Imran.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. As you see that, you know, this is the real benefits, and all of this, when it comes together, the most important thing is that our customers benefit and they can deliver value to their end users. So one of the customers, obviously, privacy and security of our customers is the utmost thing for us. So this customer we are not going to name. But the value or the problem that they were having is that they wanted to migrate all their critical applications to AWS in a very short period of time. Using DevOps approach and principles, we were able to use CloudFormation, as Ross talked about, Tony talked about. There are templates that we built. We used CloudWatch for the continuous monitoring of their environment, and we are using Core Deploy right now for this continuous deployment. And what it helped them is that their application uptime, 75% improvement over their application uptime. Before that, they were using Core Deploy or this continuous deployment options. Similarly, at Samsa, we had the same problem that they had two different accounts, AWS accounts and environments, and they wanted to make sure that they were identical in terms of the UAT and production. Again, we were able to use continuous infrastructure provisioning using those CloudFormation templates and stacks and replicate those environments across multiple accounts in a very consistent fashion. What was the result of that? This automated provisioning of UAT production is reduced their downtime associated with deployment by 50%. But this was just a couple of highlights. But instead of me talking about that, I would like to talk about another big success story. And I would like to invite Mr. Jack Stout to talk about our HHS Sandbox success story. Jack, there's a clicker.
Thank you, Imran. Hey, there's people out there. Sandbox. So how many people, when they were young, just loved playing in dirt, sandbox? You know, you made good, real stuff, though, right? I mean, you built those castles, and they were real. You lived in them for a while, and Jack, what the heck are you talking about? No, it's a sandbox. You go to the sandbox, and you play, right? So why do we need a sandbox, and what does that have to do with DevOps? Well, DevOps is new, right? This whole cloud thing is still new. I'm with the federal government, and we are in the 20th century now, so Oh, wait a minute. That's supposed to be 21st century, right? So, federal government, right? We're still playing with some things, figuring out this cloud thing, and Amazon is cloud, so we got to learn. So, sandbox. We have an arrangement for folks to be able to go into an Amazon production-like environment and play with concepts that are relatively new to some of us in the federal government. Not all of us. I mean, who knows Mark Schwartz personally? Anybody? Okay, well, Mark's way ahead and doing a lot of good stuff with DevOps. If you've heard him talk about that, it's very exciting. But not everybody's there. So to help us get there, we have this thing called a sandbox. Sandbox basically is no PII, nothing private, no production, don't do anything real, okay? Don't make any big decisions based on what you're doing. Get in there and play. Well, why are we doing all that? So that people can learn firsthand and get exposure to this cloud concept. Well, before we made this sandbox idea, how was it we could do that? See how we have here. So the problem is someone would have to go and figure out how to contract or find a credit card that had a available balance and not to exceed the, whatever it is, $2,500, $3,000 a month. It was a little difficult. And there was security and the whole acquisition piece. And I did say I was with the federal government, right? So, the things that we have to deal with in the federal government may be a little different from private industry. So it presented a challenge for us to get into these environments. So that's the problem. Let's see what we did. So we have, in addition to our contracting vehicle, which was not necessarily the simplest part of this, but in addition to the contracting vehicle, we have an ability to bring on customers, if you want to call them customers. We call them customers because in our organization we actually provide this as a service. So when someone's interested in using the cloud, they want to play with it for a little bit, we can provide them with access to Amazon's web services. InfoReliance has sped this up a bit because they've got templates. We have someone come to us and say, I want to use the cloud. Literally within a day or two from them saying, I want to use the cloud, they can be up and running. They give us a signed agreement. In the federal government, there's 7600 A and B and all kinds of cool forms we use, but I did say I was with the federal government, right? So all kinds of cool forms, and we can do that, and we get that done, and within 2 days, they're in the cloud. They're working. They're playing. I said work. I'm sorry. They're playing in the cloud. It's the sandbox. So that has been an impediment for folks in HHS and others. So we feel that we've got this ability to get folks in, play with, and that'll help us get to DevOps and other cloud benefits soon. So innovation, reliability, rapid access to these facilities and capabilities have been the outcome. We currently have 10 projects in the cloud. FDA is got 2. We have our own internal OIG, Office Inspector General. We have several others that probably don't want to be public, but we have folks that are using the cloud that would not have been able to do that had we not had this resource, at least not as easily. And we're looking to expand and continue the process. Thank you.
Very good, Jack. Thank you very much. And it's not that we exercise these things only on our customers. We use this DevOps principles and approach ourselves. And we have something called test drive program. Ross, if you could just describe a little bit about what do we do on those test drives.
So if anybody's not familiar with an Amazon test drive, it's a service that is provided through the partner network with Amazon, where if you just Google AWS test drives, there's a series of software that you can try out free of cost. And the way that this works under the hood is each partner has a registered account for this program, and when you click the button that says launch, it executes a CloudFormation template that then spins up pre-baked AMIs and makes it available to the person who's interested in seeing the software. we happened to get involved with Test Drive very early on, and it was one of our first experiences with iterating very quickly on AWS. So we needed to create these automated stacks that we could quickly provision. And one of the first ones we did was Microsoft SharePoint. And I don't know if anybody's ever set up Microsoft SharePoint before, but we ran into an interesting problem where even though SharePoint was all configured with SQL Server and Active Directory and launched with CloudFormation, and that was all great, there's a little strange concept when you deal with Test Drive, where you do not know the IP address that is going to be issued to your server until that machine starts. That matters in SharePoint because of a thing called alternate access mappings. I don't know if anybody's ever had to deal with alternate access mappings, but SharePoint will not work if not configured appropriately. So it turns out that we were able to iterate very quickly, testing out our theory on how to make this work. And by quickly, I mean I was working with a team at 11 o'clock at night, a few days before reInvent one year, where our SharePoint solution was going to be demoed on center stage. And I spun up about 40 instances within 2.5 hours trying to get alternate access mappings working on SharePoint. It worked. We took this methodology that we had used for Test Drive, and it started becoming this pattern across all of our projects. And we're seeing over a 5 times reduction in what we need for resources because we now have this confidence that we can spin things up on demand as we need them. And when we first got involved with Test Drive, we weren't really sure what we were going to benefit from it. We hoped that customers would find us on Amazon.com and then they'd call us and we'd get more business. But we found that it really helped integrate our team and really get used to a pattern of deploying things quickly. If there's an issue, just redeploy and throw away what didn't work. And just like to share that story because it's one of the first times where an integrated team at InfoReliance really started believing in this concept of DevOps and continuous deployment. And there's test drives out there, and they're from us as well as a lot of other vendors. Really encourage everybody to go check them out.
Excellent, very good. Thank you, Ross. And now we've talked about the concept, we've talked about the technology, AWS services available, but it's really a cultural change in the organization. And to talk about that, I would like to invite Mr. John Sankovich to talk about this DevOps and organizational change.
Thanks, Imran. So first off, if there's interesting questions, because we're kind of pushing up on time, I'll go through mine a little quicker. I'd rather you guys get a chance to talk to these. So just by show of hands, is there questions that people would like to go through with the group? Sure there is. Okay, so in walking through, I'm just going to do my build slide now. So one of the key things is, this team's really talked a lot about the technical side of things. Just as important, DevOps has an organizational change element to it. And organizational change, if you do a search on it, there's studies by IBM that they did 1,400 person studies on best practices. Harvard has entire case or coursework around it. McKinsey has a whole practice around it. And I think the key is when you look at it, organizational change is defined really as the result of strategies, changes in strategies, markets, or technologies. Thinking about that for a second, I mean, if cloud, there's no better thing that fits into that description probably than cloud going on right now. And so as we looked at that, the difference going from current, which is more of a siloed hierarchy where someone owns something, to the DevOps world, which is unified teams working on both dev and operations, and really access to things 24/7, and getting away from someone that says, look, I own that server, I own that data center. Really, that's the big shift between those two. Some lessons learned that we've seen is really just a little bit of a cycle. We're doing this a lot. You can tell by Ross and Imran. their discussion points. And Tony, we're doing this a lot for customers. So some of those lessons are, kind of a little bit of a cycle. It starts with the build, finding initially the right team. And that is a tiger team approach that we take. It's volunteer, and it's people that really want to embrace doing things differently. And so first off, just building the right team, making sure you have the right executive sponsorship, and people that understand there's going to be doing roles differently than they have done in the past. The second real element is generating short-term wins. If the key here is, Jack mentioned, sandbox, non-production type things. That's a good spot to be in to test out some of these versus, your mission critical 24/7 applications, not where you want to start as you're doing this. So find mission owners that are interested in it, and really embrace, something that's manageable. Start with one application, and do it, kind of a growing kind of approach. And then, the institute phase where, you get those lessons learned, you document them, you iterate, and then feed into some continuous life cycle improvement. So, this isn't, revolutionary, but it's really important not to overlook the element of change management going through in just a cycle like this. So, one of the things is, the other things that we've learned as we went through this is, there are some basics that are constant, collaboration, teams working together, following an SDLC, and then, having agility. We've talked agility a lot. All those are things you probably work with or see on a daily basis. The difference now on why DevOps is really possible the way we've described it is the AWS Cloud Utility Platform. The idea that everything in a data center is now available as an API and it's code-driven infrastructure, that enables really, and that's the difference that we've seen to be able to do some of the tools that Ross talked about. So it's a mixture of things you've always been doing, cycles you've been doing, there's things that you're well aware of, but embracing the way to do it within AWS and what that enables. So just kind of as a closing point, there's some real keys around doing this right. We've been doing it a lot with customers. Having the expertise and having the solutions architects like the team that's talking, having that focus on innovation and having test drives and having sandboxes, which is just the work HHS is doing. It would be great if all the agencies could kind of sit with Jack and understand the things he's been doing, because that whole cycle is really a great project, and it's really, as we're seeing it pick up, it's something that should be replicated. And then really just around even we mentioned a little bit contracts, contracts like SOUP and CS and GSA Schedule 70 and Marketplace. All those things, having those in place, that's something that InfoReliance has really worked hard on to kind of bring to the ability to really enable DevOps. So I just want to leave, we've got our contact information up there. We really want to help organizations as they go through their journey. There's no sense you learning some of these lessons, from scratch when we probably can share a lot of them that we've seen ourselves. So that's really kind of what we wanted to hit. I think Imran will kind of finish up. And then we would really like to take some questions, since it's a great opportunity to talk to some of the folks here.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for your time, and I hope it was beneficial and you were able to pick up a thing or two from our conversation. And I would like to open it up for questions, the team here. Any questions? I can barely see, so you'll have to be. Is there any questions? Yes, sir.
I do performance engineering, and I just recently had an experience in an enterprise organization.
Yes.
I can relate to the concepts because there is such a difficulty in trying to do, when I try to do a performance test bed where we have like 800 users
Right.
doing different things,
Yes.
the results. It's
Yeah.
like, you ask them to do something, and then this is not in the cloud.
Sure.
This is just
In general, yes.
experience.
Yes.
This is in enterprise architecture,
Correct.
on the hardware. And,
Yes.
I guess from my perspective, DevOps teams make sense, and I guess my particular question is in the experience of your Tiger team, because it seems that when you ask for things to be done, they are they don't own the responsibility. They don't see the responsibility,
Correct.
the repercussion that it has in your test, and then it's like this communication really gets blocked. So I'm interested in hearing, someone mentioned about the Tiger teams.
Yes.
And maybe some experiences with that to try to solve that,
The cross-
not owning the
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
and getting something from them, and they just don't think about it. I guess maybe
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, it's a comment and a question. Gentleman is mentioning that in an enterprise, there are these siloed environments, and when you build a Tiger team, how do you bring or inject this sense of ownership in those teams together? And this is a great question, and that's why what John was talking about, this organizational change, this is going to evolve. That's why I was talking about this continuous cycle of continual improvement, is that you start with the Tiger team, and the executive ownership is really important as part of that, because teams need to understand their primary objective, for example, development, they want to deliver new features every day, right? On the other hand, operations want to have a completely stable environment, so they want to minimize the change. This bringing them together on this shared, assuming that shared responsibility will start that ownership into their culture. And as you start with a Tiger team, generate the value, institutionalize that, then feed that back into the next cycle, expand it into the other projects, that would slowly occur, won't occur overnight. But it would take some time, but you need to go through that continual cycle to make it happen. Okay? You build it, you own it. That's what the bottom line is. Okay, if there are no other questions. Oh, so right here. Yes.
So while I'm very enamored with the idea of the rapid turnaround and changes
Yes.
into the test and into user acceptance test, the business side of it is often a lot more sensitive.
Yes.
So a user sees a problem, they go crazy.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they're not as attuned to the idea of changing things quickly.
Correct, correct.
So could you address some of
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question about this from a user standpoint. How do they adopt these changes? So we talked about multiple terms here: continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. I think this continuous delivery and continuous deployment, that needs to be understood a little bit better, in terms of that although you are continuously integrating and delivering, does not mean that you are deploying it unless it is ready for end users to be accepted. So that's where you'll have to adjust your cycle, that although your code is continuously integrating and continuously delivering, it does not necessarily mean that you're deploying it into those production environments instantly unless it has gone through that quality assurance. And that's why that third circle of quality assurance is so important. Okay. There were questions over here. Yes.
So you mentioned, the DevOps, the developers and operations team.
Yes.
They're the SMEs and what they do. They do what they do well. And, it's probably human nature that they want to continue to do what they do well.
Yeah.
So can you give some practical examples of what that gray area is? So I understand that DevOps is bringing them together so they can collaborate and communicate
Yeah.
more often.
Sure.
But what are the gray areas where a developer can sort of step out of his comfort zone? The operations guy steps out of his comfort zone. What are the practical
Sure.
examples that
Right. So this is a great question about what are those shared responsibilities in this DevOps approach, right? So if you think about as I'm writing code, I'm not thinking about the stability of the operation, right? I'm not thinking about how if I want to scale my web servers from 4 to 8, who is going to take care of that? I'm just relying on operations that they will provision some servers up at 6 o'clock in the morning when the load starts coming up. So now, as a developer, I have to understand and code that infrastructure in my program as well. So that's from a developer's side, responsibility has shifted a little bit. Ross, you wanted to add something?
I have two stories on this from two different perspectives. Well, three really. So a developer went through one of my training courses, and he said, your Cloud 101 didn't mean anything to me because I'm a developer, and all you talked about was infrastructure. So fast forward about a year, he reads an article that I wrote called, Am I Doing DevOps Yet? And at this point, I'm on a team with him, and he comes to me and he says, you know, for the first time, I'm starting to get why I should start caring about infrastructure. It's not that I know how to stand up Windows and establish an Active Directory and join machines to a domain, but as I'm developing, I should think about what I'm running on and how what infrastructure I'm running on impacts the code that I'm writing. On the flip side of this, I was working with a sysadmin, specifically building test drives, and he kept saying, you know, I'm not a developer, I don't write any code. And CloudFormation was a great introduction to that starting process of writing code. And as soon as he started scripting things and was able to reproduce administrative actions by scripts, he wanted more. How can I use Python? How can I use PowerShell? How can I integrate all of these things with one another? And then the final story was about a QA / business analyst who wanted to get more involved in what we're doing in the code so that as changes get checked in, he started learning how to review the change sets that were being checked into source control, and then he knew what was available for testing. So those are kind of those gray areas where you don't become an expert in what other people's specializations are, but you begin to overlap and understand their world, which is why I just love that picture of the Venn diagram of DevOps that explain that core center area is that true touch point of DevOps, where all of your team is working together.
Okay. All right, if there are no other questions, once again, thank you all for your time.